Elena Vasquez adjusted the collar of her dress blue uniform one final time before stepping through the glass doors of the Grand Ballroom. The Veterans Day ceremony buzzed with conversation as hundreds of service members, both active and retired, filled the elegant space. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across rows of perfectly pressed uniforms adorned with ribbons and medals that told stories of sacrifice and honor. She moved quietly along the back wall, her polished shoes silent against the marble floor. The weight of her service decorations felt familiar across her chest, each medal a memory she carried with practiced grace. At 42, Elena had learned to navigate these events with careful observation, preferring the periphery to the spotlight that always seemed to find her anyway. Colonel Bradford Hayes stood near the front, his silver hair perfectly groomed and his chest heavy with ribbons from his 28 years of commissioned service. He surveyed the room with the practiced eye of a career officer, nodding approvingly at familiar faces and noting newcomers with calculated interest. His gaze swept across the crowd until it landed on Elena, lingering on the array of decorations across her uniform. Hayes excused himself from his conversation and approached Elena with measured steps. His trained eye cataloged her decorations: the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Air Force Cross, and several others that seemed unusually distinguished for someone of her apparent age and rank. Something about the combination struck him as irregular, though he couldn't immediately place what bothered him. "Good evening, Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. "That's quite an impressive collection of hardware you're wearing tonight." Elena turned toward him, her dark eyes meeting his with quiet confidence. "Good evening, Colonel. Thank you for your service, sir." The formality of her response impressed him, but his suspicion remained. He studied her face, trying to place her among the veterans he knew from his extensive network. Her youth seemed inconsistent with the level of decoration she displayed, particularly the more prestigious awards that typically required years of distinguished service to earn. "I don't believe we've met," Hayes continued, extending his hand. "Bradford Hayes, retired Air Force. I serve primarily in logistics and personnel management." "And you are?" "Elena Vasquez," she replied, accepting his handshake with a firm grip. "I served in various capacities during my time in the service." Hayes studied her response with growing unease. Various capacities seemed deliberately vague, and her reluctance to elaborate only strengthened his suspicions. He glanced again at her chest full of decorations, noting the pristine condition of ribbons that should have shown more where if they were genuinely earned through years of combat service. "That's quite a broad description, Sergeant," he said, his tone shifting toward interrogation. "I'm curious about your specific assignments. The Air Force Cross, for instance, requires extraordinary heroism in combat. Where did you earn that particular decoration?" Elena's expression remained steady, but Hayes detected a slight tightening around her eyes. She was hiding something, and his instincts as a former personnel officer kicked into high gear. In his experience, legitimate heroes were usually eager to share their stories, especially at events like this where their service was being honored. "I prefer not to discuss the details of my deployments, Colonel," Elena replied quietly. "Some experiences are better left in the past." Her deflection only confirmed his growing certainty that something was amiss. Hayes felt the familiar satisfaction of uncovering irregularities that others had missed. He had built his reputation on attention to detail and maintaining standards. Hayes felt his jaw tighten at her continued evasiveness. In his 28 years of service, he had encountered his share of stolen valor cases, and Elena's behavior fit the pattern perfectly. The reluctance to discuss specifics, the vague responses, and the improbable collection of high-level decorations all pointed toward deception. "Sergeant, I think you misunderstand the nature of these ceremonies," he said, his voice rising slightly. "We gather here to honor genuine heroes, not to provide a stage for fabricated stories. Your reluctance to discuss your service record is concerning." Several nearby veterans began to notice the tension in their conversation. Major General Patricia Thornfield, the event organizer, glanced over from her position near the podium where she had been reviewing her notes for the evening's remarks. The crowd's festive atmosphere began to shift as people sensed conflict brewing. "I'm not telling stories, Colonel," Elena responded, her voice remaining calm despite the accusation. "I simply believe that some aspects of military service are best honored through quiet reflection rather than public discussion." Hayes shook his head with visible frustration. "That's exactly what someone with something to hide would say. I've seen too many cases of people wearing decorations they never earned." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, drawing more attention from the surrounding crowd. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun, a young Marine veteran standing nearby, turned his head at the harsh words. Other veterans began to pause their conversations, sensing the brewing confrontation that was rapidly becoming the center of attention in the elegant ballroom. "Colonel Hayes, perhaps we should lower our voices," Elena suggested, her tone remaining measured despite the growing public scrutiny. "This isn't the appropriate venue for such discussions." Hayes stepped closer, his chest puffed with indignation. "On the contrary, Sergeant, this is exactly the right venue. These ceremonies are sacred to those of us who actually served with honor. I won't stand by and watch someone make a mockery of our sacrifices." Major General Thornfield approached them with quick, purposeful steps, her expression concerned but controlled. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" she asked, though her eyes lingered on Elena's impressive array of decorations with obvious curiosity. "General," Hayes said, straightening to address the senior officer, "I believe we have a case of stolen valor on our hands. This woman is wearing decorations that simply don't match her apparent service record or age." The word stolen valor rippled through the nearby crowd like wildfire. Conversations stopped abruptly as veterans turned to stare at Elena, their expressions shifting from curiosity to suspicion. The accusation carried weight in this community, where authentic service was revered and false claims were considered the ultimate betrayal. General Thornfield studied Elena with new scrutiny, her trained eye examining the decorations more carefully. The combination was indeed unusual for someone of Elena's apparent rank and age. The Air Force Cross alone represented extraordinary heroism that few recipients survived to wear. "These are serious allegations," Colonel Hayes, Thornfield said carefully. "Sergeant Vasquez, do you have documentation to verify your service record and decorations?" Elena felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The festive atmosphere of the ceremony completely transformed into something resembling a tribunal. The crystal chandeliers that had seemed warm and welcoming now felt harsh and exposing. She could see doubt creeping into the faces around her, even among those who had nodded respectfully when she first entered. "I don't typically carry my service records to social events, General," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. Hayes seized upon her response with visible satisfaction. "Of course you don't," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "Because legitimate recipients keep their documentation readily available when wearing their decorations to public events like this." The crowd murmured agreement, several veterans nodding at the logic of his statement. Staff Sergeant Chen shifted uncomfortably, torn between the compelling nature of Hayes's argument and something indefinable about Elena's demeanor that suggested authenticity beneath her quiet dignity. "General, I recommend we contact security to have this woman removed from the premises," Hayes continued, his confidence growing with the crowd's apparent support. "She's making a mockery of everything this ceremony represents." Thornfield raised her hand for silence, clearly struggling with the situation. The accusation was serious, but something about Elena's calm composure under such intense scrutiny gave her pause. In her experience, fraudsters typically became defensive or attempted to flee when confronted so directly. "Sergeant Vasquez," Thornfield said finally, "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside until we can resolve this matter. Security will escort you to a private area where we can discuss this situation more appropriately." Elena nodded with quiet acceptance, maintaining her dignity even as security personnel approached from across the ballroom. The crowd watched in fascination as what had begun as a celebration of military service transformed into a public spectacle. Hayes stood with visible satisfaction, convinced he had exposed a fraud and protected the integrity of the ceremony. Just as the security officers reached Elena's position, a commotion erupted near the ballroom's main entrance. Event staff members rushed toward the doors with urgent whispers passing between them like electricity. General Thornfield's radio crackled with hushed communications that caused her expression to shift from concern to complete bewilderment. "Ma'am," one of her aides approached quickly, "we have a situation developing outside. There's been an unexpected arrival that requires immediate protocol adjustments." The aide's voice carried a tone of barely controlled excitement that made several nearby veterans lean forward with curiosity. Even Hayes paused in his vindication to turn toward the entrance, where additional security personnel were suddenly streaming through the doors with professional urgency. "Who exactly has arrived?" Thornfield demanded, her training kicking in as she recognized the signs of a high-level security operation unfolding around them. The aide glanced nervously at the growing crowd of curious veterans before leaning closer to Thornfield. "Ma'am, it's the president. He's made an unscheduled stop to attend the ceremony. Secret Service is securing the building now." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom as the announcement reached nearby ears. Veterans straightened their uniforms instinctively, and the tension surrounding Elena's situation suddenly seemed secondary to the monumental honor of an unexpected presidential visit. Hayes felt his moment of triumph slipping away as attention shifted from his expose to the extraordinary circumstances unfolding around them. The security officers who had been approaching Elena now received new instructions through their earpieces, redirecting them toward crowd control and perimeter security. Elena remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable as chaos swirled around her. Staff Sergeant Chen noticed that while everyone else seemed shocked by the news, she appeared almost resigned, as if she had been expecting this development. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thornfield announced to the entire ballroom, "please maintain your positions while we prepare for a distinguished visitor. This is an unprecedented honor for our Veterans Day ceremony." The crowd buzzed with excitement and nervous energy, medals glinting under the chandeliers as hundreds of veterans prepared for the highest possible recognition of their service. The ballroom doors opened with ceremonial precision as Secret Service agents flanked the entrance. The President of the United States entered with purposeful strides, his presence commanding instant reverence from every person in the room. Veterans snapped to attention automatically, their training overriding the confusion of the moment. His eyes swept across the crowd with practiced recognition, acknowledging the sea of dress uniforms and decorations before him. But his gaze didn't linger on the masses of assembled veterans. Instead, it moved with unmistakable intention toward the back of the room where Elena stood, still surrounded by the remnants of her confrontation with Hayes. "Elena Vasquez," the president said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "There you are." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Hayes felt his confidence crumble as the implications became clear. Staff Sergeant Chen's eyes widened in realization, while General Thornfield's expression shifted from confusion to dawning understanding. "Mr. President," Elena replied with quiet respect, offering a crisp salute that he returned with equal precision. The president approached her directly, ignoring the hundreds of other veterans who watched in stunned silence as their understanding of the evening's events underwent complete transformation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president addressed the stunned audience, "I had planned to attend tonight's ceremony to honor all our veterans, but I came specifically to recognize someone whose service has remained classified until now. Senior Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez led Operation Nightfall 3 years ago in Afghanistan, a covert mission that saved over 400 coalition personnel from certain death." The ballroom remained frozen in absolute silence as the weight of his words sank in. Hayes felt the blood drain from his face as the reality of his accusations became clear. He had publicly challenged a genuine war hero whose service record was so extraordinary it required presidential classification. Sergeant Vasquez single-handedly coordinated the evacuation of a compromised forward operating base while under heavy enemy fire, the president continued. Her actions that night exemplify the finest traditions of military service, and her decorations represent only a fraction of her actual contributions to our national security. Elena stood with humble dignity as her true legacy was revealed to the crowd that had moments before questioned her integrity. Staff Sergeant Chun felt shame wash over him for doubting someone who had clearly earned every ribbon on her chest through extraordinary sacrifice. The president stepped forward and pinned an additional decoration to Elena's uniform, a medal that gleamed with the authority of the highest office in the land. The Presidential Medal of Freedom now joined her collection, its presence silencing any remaining doubt about her distinguished service record. Hayes approached with visible shame, his earlier arrogance replaced by profound remorse. "Sergeant Vasquez, I owe you a sincere apology," he said, his voice barely audible. "I was completely wrong to question your service and decorations." Elena accepted his apology with the same grace she had shown throughout the confrontation. "We all make mistakes, Colonel. What matters is learning from them." The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause as hundreds of veterans recognized the extraordinary hero who had stood quietly among them. Staff Sergeant Chun joined the ovation with tears in his eyes, humbled by Elena's dignity under fire. General Thornfield approached to shake her hand personally, her expression filled with newfound respect. As the celebration continued around her, Elena smiled softly, finally receiving the recognition her classified service had long deserved. If this story of quiet military courage moved you, drop a comment about a veteran you know who deserves more recognition, or share your thoughts about Elena's strength in facing doubt with dignity.